It feels like it's been a million years since I last did a video dedicated to short fiction on my channel. Over a year ago I was doing monthly favorites, and then I fell out of doing that, and then I didn't read short fiction for 3 or 4 months at the end of 2016 when I was reading a bunch of novels and such. But I've gotten back on the horse in February, and I am trying to catch up on stuff from 2016 that I want to read, mostly my magazine subscriptions, but I have to say, I spent most of February just reading stories from Hugo recommendation lists, which was good because I found some stories that I really loved from doing that. So going forward, when I do monthly wrap-up videos for short fiction, I'm going to talk about favorite stories mostly, but I'm going to also try to hit highlights good and bad, because not all short fiction is amazing, and sometimes I want to talk about the things that disappointed me a little bit. In February, I read 59 short stories. I don't count stories from anthologies, but I am counting ones from magazine issues and various websites. Most of these stories came from Uncanny Magazine, Clarkesworld, Lightspeed, and Tor.com, but I also read some from various sources like Daily Science Fiction, Fireside Fiction, Apex, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Slate Magazine, and Asimov's. I'm gonna get the disappointments out of the way first. I read issues 13 and 14 of Uncanny Magazine, which were the November, December, and January, February issues. Usually I really love Uncanny Magazine, but 13 in particular didn't work for me very well. I thought this was a very strongly thematic issue. A bunch of the stories were kind of exploring the ramifications of violence towards women, and the standout story that everyone's talking about that fits that theme is Bo Bolander's Our Talents Can Crush Galaxies, and I was looking forward to the story because there's been so much buzz about it. I really didn't like it. So that just felt kind of flat for me. I think it's that while I think these stories were worthwhile, there were so many of them that seemed to have a similar thread that I got tired and I wanted more variety. And it could also have been my mood. A bunch of these stories were not very uplifting, and I was getting depressed. Just that happens sometimes. There was one story from this issue by Amal El-Mohtar called Seasons of Glass and Iron that I really enjoyed, however. This is a reprint from the Starlit Wood anthology, which I really need to read because it seems like it's really great. But in particular, this story by El-Mohtar, I think, captures not only what I really love about El-Mohtar, but what makes a really good short story for me. I struggle with short stories that focus too much, or far more, on the abstract, on the use of language, on atmosphere, and not so much on plot, on something being achieved in some way. El-Mohtar has always managed to balance a plot and characters with the atmosphere and the language. She's a poet and she uses language beautifully. This story, Seasons of Glass and Iron, is about a woman who is trying to wear down 7 pairs of iron shoes to get her husband back. She meets a woman who's imprisoned at the top of a glass mountain, and the man who gets up it will become her husband. They mutually discover that they are being asked to or being forced to do these things for men or because of men when they don't actually have to, and they can choose to do something else, or they can choose each other. Like, that's an option. I loved the feel of it. I loved how the story developed, and it was just beautiful. Moving on to Clarkesworld, I read issues 119 and 124, and my favorite story by far was a series of stakes by Vina, Jie-Min, Prasad. Now, I'm mostly vegan, so it's surprising to me that I became so interested in a story about printing meat. The characters really made this. The scenario is that this woman has an illegal operation using a 3D printer to make perfectly marbled meat. She gets a contract with this customer who's very violent and pushy. He wants her to provide a horrendous amount of meat for some event, and because she can't handle the workload, she gets an assistant, and then things just don't go the way that I thought they were going to with that initial setup. The joy of this story is the friendship between the two women. I like stories that really just show a friendship. There's not a romantic interest here. It's just two women teaming up. They seem very different and they help each other out. Highly recommended. I'm making it a point to read more stories from Strange Horizon this year, and to make it a bit easier on myself, I'm basically subscribing to them through their Patreon. Unlike a lot of other magazines that I follow, Strange Horizons is on a weekly schedule rather than a monthly one, and you can only get an ebook of their stories every month if you back them at like the $4 level on Patreon. So I decided to do that. I figure if I have the ebooks, I will remember to read stories more. So I've been reading a slight backlog of their stories that were recommended for Hugo Awards, and I came across one that I really enjoyed. It was unusual, not the type of story that I usually find myself gravitating towards, but it had a wonderful emotional component to it. This story is Life in Stone, Glass and Plastic by Jose Pablo Iriarte. I forget what month, year this was from. This story is about an older man who is a janitor at a building, and overnight a mosaic created out of garbage shows up on the wall of the building, and when he touches it to start taking it down, he's immersed in these memories and scenes. And then he finds other mosaics throughout the city, and when he touches them, he's flooded with those memories. So he wants to find whoever's creating the mosaics to discover what's going on, but also his wife has Alzheimer's. She's lost most of her memory, and he kind of wants these people to create a mosaic out of her memories so that he or she can experience them again. The heart of this story is that dynamic of this man and his wife and this reflection on memories and life, and it made me very emotional by the end. Lastly, I want to mention briefly 4 stories from Tor.com that I thought were fantastic, that I enjoyed so much. If I went into detail about them, this video would be way too long. The first one is The City Born Great by N.K. Jemisin. This has a powerful use of language. It is just fantastic to read for the rhythm of the language and everything. It's set in New York City. It follows a teenage boy who kind of gets this magical power over the city or something, like the city is alive. I don't know where this story came from. It was great. I've heard that one of the upcoming books that Jemisin is under contract for is set in New York City and has to do with magicians in New York City. So I have this secret hope that The City Born Great is a sneak peek at that world. Even if it isn't, it is a great one-shot. Next is the wonderfully named Something Happened Here But We're Not Quite Sure What It Was by Paul McAuley. This story is from a broader universe, which is its only weakness, that it references things that happened before that if you haven't read the other books, you don't know what they were, which is my problem with it, but I still managed to understand the core of the story. It's set on like a small town on another planet where human colonists live, and an organization wants to come in and I think install like a satellite dish or whatever so they can go and look at planets and maybe make contact with other alien species. Something previously has happened that makes the people living there very uncomfortable with this idea of talking to aliens. So it's all a discussion about whether they should do that and if they should sabotage the project and such. What made this story for me is the tone. I thought it was vaguely humorous, and it made me very much want to read the novel set in this universe. For 9 Fox Gambit lovers, there is Extracurricular Activities by Yoon Lee. This is a prequel story about an undercover mission that Jadao went on when he was still alive and not in somebody else's head, and I thought it was so funny. It was an interesting story. I love seeing Jadao in action, and I laughed out loud a couple of times. The last story that I want to mention is also from Tor.com, and it is called The Art of Space Travel by Nina Allan. This is actually a novelette, and I particularly liked it for balancing these sort of abstract and concrete qualities and really reflecting on like the personal life of an individual as part of a greater whole, as part of history. It's about a young woman whose mother had been involved in a disastrous first mission to Mars, and now this young woman works at a hotel where the second wave of Mars astronauts are going to spend their final days before leaving Earth, and she is reflecting on what happened to her mother, who was probably poisoned or badly contaminated by chemicals from an accident and is losing her memory, and her life working at the hotel, and this question of who is her father, because she believes that her father was one of the men who went on the first Mars mission, but she doesn't know for sure. It was just very beautiful, and I was glued to the page until the very end. So that's it for the short fiction that I read in February. Hopefully March will be just as good for reading a bunch of stories and continuing to catch up on my backlog, though at this rate I may never catch up. But anyway, there was some really great stories in there. If you've read any short stories recently that you think I should check out, please comment and leave your suggestions down below. I would love to hear them. And thank you very much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Bye.